Hi everyone, welcome back to Novel Nomad, and you may be wondering why I'm sitting on this side of the video. That is because today I am doing my winter wrap up, and many of the books that I read during the winter months are not here with me. So I'm going to be putting the lovely videos in so you can still see the covers and different things, images related, but not like completely lose my head in the process. So during the month of winter, I took part in the Ripped Bodice, which is a romance bookstore in LA. I took part in their summer book bingo. Now, yes, it is summer over there, winter here, but I was still so excited to take part. I printed out the card and you could see my TBR, which I'll link in the video and down below. But this is my finished bingo card, and you'll probably soon discover even though I had a TBR, I didn't stick to it religiously because I just went with whatever I felt like reading at the time. So what I'll do for my wrap up is, because there's so many books to go through, I'll go through the wrap up for the bingo first, and then afterwards I'll show you what I read for fun and pleasure in between the bingo books. So one of the first bingo books I read was The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. I absolutely loved this one. It's set in the 1920s and it follows four women who try to escape their life in London and find out who they are in a beautiful house in Italy. I gave this one about 4.5 stars and I absolutely loved it, and I recommend it for anyone who loves historical fiction or the 1920s. The next bingo book is Dead Witch Walking by Kim Harrison. This was a good read for me. I gave it about 3 out of 5 stars. It introduced you to a different society where you've got witches and vampires, where they've come out in society a few hundred years ago and they've kind of taken over and they control different elements of the human society. So it was interesting. It just wasn't my favourite urban fantasy that I read. Following in the urban fantasy genre, I also read Magic Bites by Ilona Andrews. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. If I was going to pick my favourite urban fantasy that I read out of the entire bingo readings, this would be it. So it basically follows Kate Daniels, who is a mercenary, and she is called in to investigate a very interesting magical disturbance, but also her guardian gets killed, so it's very personal for her at the same time. Next was Dragonbound by Thea Harrison. This was a great, another urban fantasy, more fantastical romance read, and it was really intense. I really loved the characters, the difference. I think I slightly ruined myself because I read a review and it gave a spoiler away, but it didn't damage my reading the book too much because I really enjoyed the development of the characters' relationship. It was quite fast paced, but at the same time there was depth in character development. Next I read First to Burn, which is book 1 in the Immortal Viking series by Anna Richland. This was my Viking pick. I don't really read much into Viking novels, nor have I read much into the romance Viking novels, but this one was set in the 21st century and he's an immortal Viking, so it sounded good. The female character was wonderfully complex and well developed. She was an army doctor. I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. I had issues with the use of army lingo, how frequently it was used, and the dialogue was a little bit jumpy, and there also wasn't great character development, so I was a little bit disappointed in that mark. But otherwise, an interesting book for my first Viking read. Next I read Checking Out by Helena Hunting. This was an interesting read. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It had the interesting animals, so I think you had a ferret and a tarantula, but I liked the development of the characters' relationship, just not the entire plot itself. I thought it was a bit slow. Then I read In the Middle of Somewhere by Roan Parrish, and this was to fulfill the man smells like some kind of tree, and of course one of the guys smelled like cedar. This is a guy on guy romance, and it was wonderfully developed. Both characters were complex and interesting, and they actually had great character development inside the relationship and externally outside the relationship, and I thoroughly enjoyed the community that it built around the two characters and how that links into the greater narrative arc of the series, and I'm very much looking forward to reading the second book. Next I read A Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee, which is absolutely fabulous and fun and full of frivolity. This is about a bi main character who doesn't really have a great anchor on life, but he goes on a grand tour of Europe with his longtime friend, and he discovers many things along the way which causes him to grow up and understand the world in which he lives a little bit more. It was absolutely fantastic on a historical fiction standpoint. Whilst the main character did have quite a modern voice to really get to the young adult audience, I think it didn't stretch too far out of the realm of possibilities for the time that it was written in. Thinking about mid 1700s, Georgian period, all the lace, the fluff, the embroidery on the jackets and the wonderful wigs. Although in this one, Monty himself, who is the main character, refuses to wear a wig because his hair is so gorgeously curly it doesn't require it. This one I gave 5 out of 5 and it well deserved that. So following in the YA vibe, I also read Geekerella by Ashley Poston. This is absolutely adorable. It is a really cute retelling of Cinderella. Obviously Geekerella gives a great title, but it connects Cinderella greatly into a modern audience, and especially one which we're seeing greatly develop through the internet, which is fandoms. And this one follows a bit like a Star Trek TV series, kind of like Firefly and things like that, where it is a fandom follows the new remake of the movies. And I absolutely loved how the romance was developed. It seemed very modern and very adorable, so highly recommend this one if you just want a cute squishy read. 2 books that I read for Book Bingo are actually the 2 latest releases in the Hudson Valley series by Alice Clayton, and that is Cream of the Crop and Buns. I think I much preferred Buns over Cream of the Crop, mainly because Cream of the Crop I had certain issues with how characters responded to a certain problem, and that greatly threw me out of the book, so I found it really hard to reconnect with the characters when finishing that book. However, in Buns I absolutely loved the setting, the situation and the romantic development between the characters. I didn't think there was a great lot of character development happening or exploration into their pasts, which did detract from my overall rating of Buns, but I just loved the male character in that one. I thought he was absolutely fantastic. I also read River of No Return by B. Ridgway. This one I gave 4 out of 5 stars too. It was a very, very slow read for me. The writing is quite dense and full of description, which is quite good because it is a historical novel but also a time travel. So it is a historical character set in present day, so his language, vocabulary and lingo needed to be feel authentic to the time that he was from, but also pick up new lingo as well, and it was quite well done, quite well blended, but also I loved the mystery and the intrigue that surrounded him and his introduction into the very first stage of the book. So this one received a 4 out of 5. I also read Gretchen Gao's Love Handles, which was to tick A Woman Inherits a Business. This was quite an interesting read. I did find issues with the family drama, character motivations and therefore actions afterwards, but I did really like the complex characters and how it was a slow burn romance, which is some of my favourites. Within the winter months I read the entire, and let me just get this straight, the entire 13 novels of the New Species series by Laura and Dona. So part of the Book Bingo I read Fury and Brawn, but I used Fury for Broke AF Hero and Brawn for an entire conflict that could have been resolved in a single conversation, which is one of my most hated tropes. Now these books, I really enjoyed Fury, and I did enjoy some other books in this series a little bit more than Fury and Brawn, even though Brawn fits into that really annoying category, and it did have issues with the emotional development and conflicts between the characters, which why it earned its place in that category. I actually enjoyed other aspects of the series, and it was interesting to see how from the first book all the way through the series it covers a few years, and it's interesting to see how the new species develop and change within the world. The Rooks Wager by Christy Cowdell I gave 3.75 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed the complex characters that were explored and their issues that were beyond the relationship. However, the drawbacks for me on that read was the fact that the relationship seemed to suddenly flourish into love or a fully committed relationship rather than you actually witnessing that happen. I would have preferred to see more relationship development in the pages rather just in passing. I gave 3 stars to An Unnatural Vice by KJ Charles. This is a historical romance that is really interesting, setting in the Victorian period, late Victorian period, and it really develops the London setting. It doesn't try to gloss the realities of late Victorian London, especially the huge industrial factor that was present in the city, and also it is a diverse range of characters, not just from the upper middle class or higher classes. It has a great variation in classes that intermix and mingle over certain issues, drama and murder mysteries. This is the second in the Sins of the City series, and I thoroughly enjoyed the first book, so it was great to see the story continue in the second. The next was for a genre that I haven't read. I did end up choosing Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion because I actually haven't read zombie fiction. This one was great because it technically was a romance. In a way, there was a relationship develop throughout the book, but I absolutely loved it. I gave 4.25 out of 5. And I thought the narration of the main character R was beautifully done. I connected with his characters so much, even though he was a zombie. It just was a fascinating read. I also read Chasing 8 by Lorelei James. This one was an alright romance. I probably gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I don't really remember enjoying it that much. It was a bit of a slog, but it was great to see the characters' romance develop over a period of time and how they went from friends to lovers. Next was Muscling Through by J.L. Merrow. I didn't thoroughly enjoy this book. The writing was a bit patchy and the character dialogue was a bit odd and really hard to get into. One of the characters was very heavily accented and that was portrayed through the writing, but it was just very hard to connect with the characters, as it was a novella as well. One of my absolute favourite reads from Book Bingo, which got 4.5 out of 5 stars, was Phantom Limbs by Paula Garner. I thoroughly enjoyed this book because it explores a complex mire of grief, loss, self-identity and family. And I liked how the grief itself wasn't a plot device and wasn't heavily relied upon by the author. It was actually an exploration of the characters after grief, which was really fascinating. My first Nicholas Sparks book was Safe Haven, and I actually found myself really enjoying this. I have a love-hate relationship with the movies. I will watch them. I find them a bit candy fluff, but the book itself was quite well done. I gave it about a 3.5 to a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought there could have been better improvements on character development and plot development, but I really liked the basis of the characters. It just felt lacking in certain areas. Now, one of the things that first got me into YouTube was the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, and I just found myself wanting to read The Secret Diary of Lizzie Bennet. And not only did it bring back my desire to rewatch the entire show again, but it was a great companion novel for the series. But it could stand on its own because it still managed to be a retelling of a Jane Austen without needing to rely too heavily on the reader's knowledge of the show. For my anthology selection, whilst I am still reading Kaleidoscope, which is a wonderful anthology, I had to quickly pick a shorter anthology, and that is Diamond, the Romance Writers of Australia anthology in their Little Gems. Now, they do this every year for the competition, and this was actually quite a fun read because it's basically little bite-sized romance stories. Of course, there's not much character development. There's not really a slow burn relationships, which is what I usually like, but it was still a great read. Finally, the last book that I read for the bingo competition was Written in Red by Anne Bishop. Now, this is the very first Anne Bishop book I read, and I absolutely loved it. It is another urban fantasy, except this time the others, technically, which are all these other creatures, they run the world, and what we know as a world is completely different ever since they emerged. And humans do exist, they do have inventions, but they are still the hunted. They are not the top predator as we know it today. They are not in control. The others are. This was a great read because it raised not only social but political issues, and how diplomacy and acceptance of others who are different from us are really, really important. I think I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars, but it was very well deserved. But I did not just stop at book number 1. For my other reads during winter, I did proceed to read the rest of the Others series. I have so many here. This is book 2, Murder of Crows, Vision in Silver, Marked in Flesh, and Etched in Bone. Now, this follows the main character, Meg, who you were introduced to as she enters the Lakeside community, which is an others community in the human city of Lakeside, and it is absolutely fascinating. I really liked the different powers. Meg is a human, but she has certain powers, which is quite unique. But this series was absolutely amazing. I had such a book hangover after reading these books, and I just want more. Even though I was completely and utterly satisfied with the last book and how the series ended, I still want more Meg and Simon. I really, really do. And I just want to know more about the others and the different creatures and communities out there. It was absolutely fantastic, and I'll just have to reread it. Next we move into the books that I read for absolute pleasure between my book bingo reads. So I have already mentioned that I read the rest of the other series outside of the book bingo categories, and also all 13 of the New Species series by Lauren Donor, because they are wonderful little tidbits that I could just pick myself up with. However, I did read a few more books during the winter months. First one is The Wild Air by Rebecca Muskell. I have just uploaded my review of this one, so I'll link it in the video and down below if you want to check that out. I am dressed in an aviator's costume, so I hope you enjoy my eccentricities in that one, but this was an absolutely fantastic read. Beautiful, quiet fiction. I just love when a fiction doesn't have to be loud, brash and constantly plot driven. If it's just quiet character development, it is also just as powerful. Next was The Royal Flush, which is book 3 in her Royal Spiner series by Rhys Bowen, and I really enjoyed this. Georgie, I find, is a great read to pick me up every now and then, quite fun. But out of Georgie and Daisy, I have to admit I do love my Daisy Dalrymple. So next is a no-brainer. Of course, I read the next 2 books in the Daisy Dalrymple series. This is book 1, Death at Wentwater Court, and I read book number 4, which is Murder on the Flying Scotsman, and book number 5, Damsel in Distress. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I absolutely love where the character development is going. I have to admit though, it seems a little bit out of whack for time. I'm always thinking it happens over a series of months, but of course the murders only happen over a few weeks. So we are slowly going through the very early 20s. So I can't wait to get my hands on book number 6. Next was a reread for me, and that is Beard Science by Penny Reid, book 3 in the Winston Brothers series. I just received this beautiful book from the Ripped Bodice bookstore. This is probably my absolute favourite book of Penny Reid's. She writes very smart, sassy and witty characters, and it is just an absolutely fantastic read, mainly because Cletus Winston and Jen Sylvester are hilarious together. Another book that I read for pleasure, I was actually lent by a colleague at my work, was After You by Jojo Moyes. Now, I read Me Before You last year for book club, and After You, I think I needed the time between them. I'm not sure if this is going to be highly controversial, but I actually preferred After You to Me Before You. And let me just say that even though I loved Will and I became more emotionally connected to the characters in book 1, book 2 felt more realistic in the relationship, because I think she developed a lot healthier relationship in book 2. I think she had to move through her grief and through her problems, and that wasn't hugely focused on in book 1, but book 2 you saw her going through everything that she had to do in book 1, and she had to face it in book 2, which was absolutely excellent to read. And unlike some of my fellow book clubbers who read it straight away and didn't like it at all, I think you need the break. I think I needed that year break to get that distance between book 1 and book 2 to see how Lou would develop in the future. Finally, the book club book for August was 20s Girl by Sophie Kinsella, and I really enjoyed this one. Although I must say I did read it for Sadie, the great aunt ghost who guides Lara, the modern day girl, and her great niece through the trials and tribulations of modern day life, and it is quite a fabulous ending. So that was my winter wrap up. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any recommendations that you read in the last season, summer or winter, whichever it may be, let me know down below. I always love recommendations, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!